having conversations with your staff. Take the time to listen. Okay, that habit of not speaking first and just listening to your staff and making sure that you're connecting with them. When they feel that they can talk to you, then that's going to reap lots of benefits. They're more likely to be open with you later on. They're more likely to be proactive in giving you a heads up on scenarios.
You walk around the school with a principal, and the principal knows the kids' names, and the kids know the principal's name or the head's name, and they're interacting. That's a healthy school. You walk around with a head and nobody talks to nobody, you can tell that those are silos. There's no relationships, there's no engagement, there's no connection. Yeah, that makes it big difference.
Okay, welcome to the Education Vanguard. I'm Justin. Today I'm proud to be and pleased to be having a conversation about school leadership. And I'm joined by Howard Stribbell, who's founder and CEO of Hive Schools International, who advises and leads and consults international schools. He's also Chief Learning Officer of 21st Century Learning. So he wears many hats, including cowboy hats, I think sometimes, right, Howard?
Right.
But we try and keep these intros short. So welcome to the podcast, Howard.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Thomas Midbo, who's a former principal in Canada as well as in Asia and is currently an education consultant. And welcome to the podcast,
I'm
Thomas.
excited to be a part of the podcast and talking about this white paper that I was excited to be a collective effort along with Howard.
Yeah, thank you. Together, as Thomas was saying, we have great perspective here and deep expertise on school leadership. Howard, Thomas, and some others that we'll be having future conversations with recently co-wrote a white paper on leadership called Leading with Clarity, Conscience, and Community, Rethinking School Leadership. It's already been downloaded over 200 times in just a couple of days that it's been released, so seems to have struck a nerve so far. So I'd like to begin this conversation with Howard and just ask by asking, what is the problem you are trying to solve with this white paper? Why now? What's behind all of this?
Yeah, I think all of us in our leadership journeys, we all assume that it's unique to just us. And we always worry, is it this difficult for other people? How do other people find it? And so it really was a qualitative deep dive into the lived experiences of leaders. And what we found was those insecurities, those doubts, those concerns, those challenges that we face individually actually resonates through the whole leadership community. And so it really allowed us to look deeper into that. And the other authors of the paper there, Dr. Kathy, Dr. Roseanne, and Dr. Lisa, fabulous leaders and researchers as well. And as Thomas and I and those women shared those conversations, we just found that this was across the board really affecting most leaders.
Yeah, and what surprised you most when you were doing these interviews and the research for the paper?
Just how deeply leaders care about their roles and how deeply they care about their teams. So one, there's a very, very deep sense of responsibility to the school, to their students, to their staff, the care for us. And then at the same time, there's kind of this gap of the care for themselves and this idea of wellness and rhythms and how do they take care of themselves while still being responsible for such a big organization and team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue to one of the first parts of the white paper, which talks about a leadership shift from being a hero to the host, in terms of that gap between personal wellness and organizational wellness. So I want to kind of turn to Thomas. In the white paper, there's a quote from Roseanne who says, leadership's not about being the hero, it's about creating the conditions for everyone else to thrive. And you say in the same section, as a new leader, I didn't have a roadmap. The mentorship program saved me. So you could talk a bit more about that and how leaders can shift from being heroes to hosts and how personal wellness and all of these things come together to support leaders that will also then support their organization.
Correct. When I first got into educational leadership, as I talked about, that there was in the paper that I had no mentor originally myself. I didn't really know what to do, but the organization that I was part of, they had a mentorship program. So they linked me up with a seasoned school leader. And oh my gosh, that opened so many opportunities for me to have conversations, a lot of hypothetical conversations. I don't really know what to do here. What would you do? So it gave me the opportunity to ask a tremendous amount of questions, somebody that had some experience under their belt. Now, after being a little bit more seasoned, after about 20 years, I had people coming to me and asking me those questions. And then I went into the international educational world, and I found myself back into that original spot where this is a brand new setting for me. I'm not really sure how to approach this particular situation. And I had lots of people that I could tap in on, Dr. Howard Stribbell being one of those people where I could say, here I've got this international, potentially, we've got some Israeli parents and I've got some Palestinian parents together. How do I handle this particular situation? And it's great to be able to have those people to tap into, to ask those kind of questions in a safe environment. So educational leaders need to think of themselves and sort of give back to the educational leadership world where you want to put yourself into, you're wanting to share your knowledge, not so much in that hero role, but where you want to set up people around you to be successful, where you can give them the opportunity to ask you questions and put yourself out there as a leader saying, I do want to help foster international leaders and give them the opportunity to be successful. And so putting yourself in that scenario where you're reaching out to them and saying, how are you doing? What are some things that I can help you with along the way? Certainly that going from the hero to being, what can you do to build up the people around you? One of the first things I realized that there's not the formal structure that you do in a battle like the school division that I was part of, where they've got central office to go to. Whereas when I got into the international world, I initially thought it wasn't there, but there was an informal setup that there was a lot of people for us to tap into. And when I came to Southeast Asia, Howard was definitely trying to create that kind of environment where leaders had the opportunity to have conversations with each other, where they could actively reflect with each other. I'm dealing with this scenario. Can you help me talk through it? I've heard several leaders say that kind of almost quote for quote, that kind of a scenario. This is the struggle I've got. Can we have a model of conversation with me? And once you've got your leaders putting themselves into that position where they're supporting themselves, even though there may be two different private schools, but they see themselves as a support for each other. And one thing I've really seen with Hive, that's definitely been a platform for school leaders to be able to join and put themselves in a safe environment.
Yeah, everything you're saying there around mentorship really strikes a chord for me personally as well. I mean, for me, my own leadership journey in international education, mentorship has been huge. And I've been lucky to have some great mentors and over the years. And a lot of that honestly was just very accidental. It wasn't anything that was part of any kind of formal program. And we hear a lot about coaching these days, but I actually think mentorship is something that is equally important for people that are particularly beginning their leadership journey. I don't know, Howard, because I know you've had some great mentors as well.
Amazing mentors. I was very lucky to have mentors who had that experience and they could teach me how to read a P&L, how to look at the assets and contracts and how to manage the income and to find revenue streams. And that was something I was not prepared for at all. And I think most heads are. I mean, I think you've touched on this, both you guys. We do a really bad job of preparing people to be promoted. When I was a teacher, I didn't know what a VP did. I thought I did. Then when I was a VP, I thought I knew what a principal did. And then I became a principal and realized I didn't. And then when I was a principal, I thought, I know what to do as a head. I could do this, I could do that. And then I became a head and realized, oh, wow. So, the military, and I don't know if this is a myth or not, but I suspect not, that one of the primary jobs of every officer is to train the person underneath them to take their place in case the worst case situation happens. And I don't think we do that as educational leaders. I think sometimes it's so compartmentalized that there's aspects of each role that we do not let the people underneath us be aware of. And the mentorship, whether formal or informal, is a good way to do that so that people get a better understanding of what's involved in the role and then how to build their own capacity to handle it when they do get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And quite often I find, Howard, that we don't realize how important that step is, because the hero complex that is being alluded to in this topic, that we know it all, we can do it all. However, if we do take that time to nurture some of our middle leaders, that we don't need to take on that hero role. We need to tap into their resources to be an even stronger organization, because then they're going to feel comfortable enough to take some risks, calculated risks and careful risks, but it's going to be overall better when they're feeling a part of the system, feeling part of the decision making. You just have stronger actions working towards whatever initiative that we're working on, or towards our school vision or our school missions.
Yeah, one of my early mentors has always struck with me. He said that a true leader is somebody who, when they leave the organization, is leaving other leaders there. If you're the person who's the center of everything type of leader, when you leave a vacuum. And actually, what a leader's chief role actually is developing new leaders, right? And I think kind of mentorships and intentional systems behind that are kind of important. I mean, a term that we use is distributed leadership. So I wonder if we could sort of talk a little bit about that in terms of what are some actual concrete examples where you have created systems where there is distributed leadership, so that there are systems that are beyond you as an individual.
From my end, that the distributive leadership is a critical component. As Howard has talked about before, where you go into these in international school setting, you think you know it all, you think you've got everything handled, but, and this will be a little bit of a later topic for us, I believe, then the burnout happens. You don't really do a good job of anything. You're just scratching the surface on all of it. Whereas if you've got that distributive leadership, you are putting people in place, you're building those people up that are experts or want to be experts in those areas, and you're giving them the opportunity to shine. You definitely want to know what's going on in all of those areas, and you want to be lockstep with them of what the processes are going on, what are they working towards, what are the challenges they're facing, and you're having those conversations with them to make sure that they feel like they're in the right direction based on what the school's vision is, based on what the school's direction is. But you're not doing that completely directly. You don't have, as the head of school, you don't have the time or the energy to be able to do that in all the areas that are in an international school setting. And so I think it's critical to have that distributive leadership. If you don't, then you're seeing a system that's flawed. You're seeing a system that, like you say, when that principal or that head of school is down for whatever reason, goes off to a conference, goes off to some meetings, then nobody knows what to do around there. And then things fall apart. Things don't progress like they're supposed to.
Yeah, and I can think of a good example as TIS was getting bigger and bigger. We really wanted to have a strong school culture and a strong team. And in that building, we had kindergarten on one floor, grades 1 to 3 on the next, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, then 7 to 9, then 10 to 12. And so instead of doing VPs, or instead of principals trying to run everything, or the head, we put division coordinators in on each floor. And they were teachers, lead teachers, who were also the division coordinator. And they were responsible for two things. One, the day-to-day activities, everything from like recess, supervision and walking in the hallways, to making sure the hallways were clean, all of that kind of administrative kind of stuff, and team building and culture.
I can totally imagine how that would be the case, Howard. I want to pivot now to talk a bit about a big topic that's come up. And I mean, it's always been a topic, but it seems to be really trending. And this is this concept of self-care and how leaders balance the needs for themselves and the needs for their organization. I know there's other organizations doing this as well. And so it's clearly something out there in the ether around self-care for leaders. So maybe, Thomas, could you talk a bit about what you said in the white paper about self-care is not selfish? What do you mean by that? And what are your reflections on what leaders need to do or ought to do around self-care?
Well, the white paper definitely references burnout amongst school leadership. And I do believe that the school community does look at the school leader. They're being watched the whole time. How are they going to handle scenario? Okay, we're getting into report card time, and is the school leader starting to burn themselves out? How are they handle these high stress moments? So I believe in many scenarios, the educational leaders definitely have to model as well. So how are we demonstrating times where we're doing that self-care, please? How are we showing our staff that we want, when we're at the school, we're on and we're ready and we're prepared to be able to do the work that needs to be done? But we're also showing the staff that, okay, good old Stephen Covey's phrase, I know how to sharpen the saw. I know how to take that time to step back, and that can be done in a variety of ways. You could be taking those moments where you're joining the staff pickleball game, or you're going to some staff events where after school where they're doing the quiz nights. Okay. Or I'm talking about, I spent some time tonight just being on the phone with my mom and dad, or spending some time where my wife and I just went for a walk along the Mekong. So staff listen to those pieces and then they watch and they want to know that if the school leader's healthy, okay, then that school leader is going to be ready when I need them. I think one of the things we also need to demonstrate as school leaders that we don't just shut down when the day is done, that we definitely understand that there's the moments throughout that school year where it's going to be heavy work, longer hours, and that we are demonstrating that we can invest that important time. However, when there is that time for us to do that self-care, we're able to do that. And we definitely see that that's important. If the school community sees that's important to us, then they will know we see that that's important for them.
Yeah, that modeling word I think is really key there, right? What you do has such a huge impact on the organization because people are watching what you do as a
Yeah.
leader. I'm sure you have some reflections on that, Howard.
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference. I honestly, I used to think self-care, work-life balance was just fluff. It was like, come on, that's meant for people that are too weak to handle it. Like if you want to lead, put on your big boy shorts and let's get it done. And on one hand, I wasn't really in favor of work-life balance, and I often see people using it as an excuse, or I thought it was an excuse. But what it does mean is that there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's just choices. And as Thomas said, sometimes you have to get the job done. You cannot shut off at 4 o'clock every day and just say, oh, it's because of my levels. It's like, no, there's a conference tonight or a meeting tonight with all the parents or the parent teacher interviews, or it's with both parents, or you're in crisis. Well, you have to be prepared to handle that kind of capacity. At the same time, though, burning the candle at both ends, running the 60-hour weeks, that is going to catch up to you. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not healthy, you're not eating well, it's going to hurt. And so it's really important that we do take care of ourselves. The better we are as individuals, the better we will be as leaders as well.
One of the areas that I struggled with was responding to emails and the times of day when I would do that. Earlier on, what I would do is quite often I'd be dealing with emails like up till 12 o'clock, or depending on the time of the year, maybe even 1 o'clock, or a flip side, I'd be getting up early and being able to go through my emails and respond. And I never utilized the scheduled send feature. In my initial thinking was just because I send it at 1 o'clock in the morning doesn't mean they have to read it at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I still struggled with that, but I had to recognize that the staff were watching when I was sending these emails out. And so they were seeing it as a bit of an unhealthy scenario, me sending emails or responding to emails at that time. So I had to step back and model a different practice. Whereas then I was using the scheduled send so that they didn't feel like I was bombarding them 24 hours a day with email communication or responding to their questions. So that was an area that I struggled with at the start, but definitely saw the importance on how my perception was towards the staff on how I was dealing with email communication. And I think that little switch definitely did help on the side of the staff side.
I totally agree. You stole my example there, Thomas. Actually, I was going to share that's something I always tell leaders is use the delay
Yeah.
send. If you are up in the middle of the night sending emails, at least make it seem like it was sent at 9:05. The trick is to always pick a very strange number so it seems more
Right.
real. If you say 9 o'clock exactly and send about 12 emails, then that's a real tell. You've got to kind of, do it. I think I always say to leaders too that actually the amount of email you send will determine how much you receive. And you've got to really think about how do you use the CCs and all of that kind of stuff in your organization, because especially in bigger organizations, that there is a relationship there. And I mean, it was years ago, I was working in a school and there was a sort of a conversation around emails and how much work there was and complaints from leaders, right? Saying, well, my email is so overwhelming. So we did actually a quick study where I put in, and it was possible with the email system that we had at the time, where I could track how many emails people sent and then how many they received. And there's like a clear correlation, right? If you send a lot of emails, like you personally sending them off to people, then you will receive more. And if you're CCing people, that almost compounds. And so I think what is the right communication tool to be even using, right? Because if you're overusing email as a way to get information to send things out, then you're going to create problems on your end as
Mhm.
well.
One of the things that Howard and I have talked about, as well as Leah, who's the current head of Phnom Penh, that think about the email that you're about to send. Does it need to be sent in an email? Is it better having a conversation with that individual? And then some school leaders
Mm.
might think, well, there's the time that I've got to take finding this person, likely going to that person's classroom. And so it's just easy to hit draft it, send it. However, the benefit of it is you've taken the time to make a connection with that individual. They will see, okay, this is an important thing that they want to discuss with me. They're making the effort to come and connect with me. And you may think it's going to save you time, but in the long run, it's probably going to benefit you in multiple ways.
Absolutely, yeah. Howard, I wonder, do you have any examples? Because Thomas shared about the email around where leaders can model boundaries. How do you get the job done, but also create some boundaries between yourself and staff and parents?
I'm not very good at boundaries. Because I'm on the road a lot and I work with many different organizations, I have my weekly schedule of scheduled meetings and they happen regardless of where I'm at. So, and sometimes it's in one school or another school, but sometimes it's in a car to the airport, sometimes it's at the airport, sometimes it's on a train. But I guess what I'm trying to show is that my meeting with this person is important enough, but I'm going to make sure that I have it regardless of where I happen to be. Boundaries, I guess the key thing for me is more about capacity. And if you constantly operate a crisis mode, and you may know of some people who are like that, when a real crisis hits, they can't handle it. And so as a leader, we need to reflect what's the appropriate level of response here. And that way, when a real crisis hits, I'm going to be able to manage it as well.
That's a
Yeah.
phrase that's really important to me, is the reacting versus responding. You don't want to be in a scenario where you're reacting. So, for example, my email where you just send off somebody's done something and you want to respond to what they've done or to follow up with them. Whereas if you just react, then you're not being careful enough. You're not focusing on what is the best way forward. So as Howard talked about, that putting yourself in a position where you're reacting only when somebody's safety is in jeopardy is when you should be reacting to scenarios. Whereas, as Howard said, you want to be responding as best as possible at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like another good segue actually to another section of the white paper, which is about feedback. And obviously, a leader needs to create a positive environment and be a cheerleader and be supportive, but also a leader's responsibility is also to have sometimes provide feedback and have potentially challenging conversations. And I think it's probably a common pattern in leadership where leaders delay or maybe don't even provide difficult feedback. And I wonder, how can leaders reduce that hesitation to provide that feedback? And I'll start with the man with no boundaries, Howard, maybe.
Well, I think there's two types of leaders when it comes to in difficult conversations: those who really enjoy them and do them badly, and the rest of us who hate them and try to avoid them. We all know of some people who arrogant, pride, I don't know, who just are too sharp at times. But I think education is mostly filled of the latter type, where we are not good at having conversations that are difficult and giving feedback that might be negative. Sometimes I see too often leaders will sugarcoat it too much, and then that doesn't help. They're so worried about offending the person, but they don't really bring the clarity that's necessary about the expectation and about the follow up. I mean, like all humans, we want to avoid conflict. I think as teachers, and most principals are teachers at heart, we're nurturers and we want to nurture the person and care for them and guide them along. And so I think sometimes we get wrapped up in being a little bit too nice when we do need to be a little bit more direct. The model that I use for that comes from Dr. Brené Brown, and it's about clarity is kindness. And that really struck me because it's like, yeah, if you're not clear, you're not being kind. And the more clear we are, the better the shared expectation is going to be. And then the person has had to fix or improve. And that works much better.
For myself, whenever I've gone into a scenario where I've needed to provide feedback, it's served me better, it's served the staff better when there was that level of trust between myself and the staff. To me, that was a critical component to work establishing that trust between the teacher and myself. The second piece in there that I learned over time is not give the feedback with some preconceptions in my mind. When I would give the feedback, I was really matter of fact. This is what happened within the classroom that I saw. And then I would follow that up by saying, what did you see in that classroom? Or what was the thinking going on when this happened? What that turned the scenario from me going in there with assumptions in some cases, me going in there telling them this is what was you were thinking. Whereas I gave that staff member the opportunity to think about it for themselves. How did they see that scenario that I was observing? And then gave them an opportunity to give back to me what their intention was or what their expected outcome was or what did they think they saw. And then that allowed for further conversation, whereas then I could come back and say my initial thinking was this, but can you talk to me more about that? So it created a dialogue that allowed them to think about it even further or maybe differently than they had. But at the same time, I was vulnerable enough to, okay, was my perception wrong in that scenario? And I always found that in the end, if they felt that they were given the opportunity to provide their perspective or felt they were heard, that was always better in the long run. I can give you an example where I was doing a classroom observation and it did not go well at all. I felt that the classroom management was below what was expected. Had the conversation with that individual, I said, this is the scenario that I saw. These particular students were doing this over here. These particular students were doing over there. Can you tell me what were you designing your classroom to be like? And still in the end, we were not in alignment with how we felt the classroom was going. That individual disagreed with my interpretation and how it went, but we continued to follow up. In the end, we still didn't agree on what happened, but that individual did come back and say, we disagree, but at least I felt I was heard.
Yeah. I mean, feedback goes both ways in a sense as
Yeah.
well, right? It needs to be a conversation for sure. Part of feedback and observing teachers is documentation. And I wonder if you might reflect, maybe starting with Howard again, on how do you do that in a way that is not creating potentially a culture of surveillance. And I think in a lot of schools, the whole observation piece is high stakes, right? Because from a teacher's perspective, the principal might only be in their classroom once or twice a year, right? So it could seem they're only seeing a snapshot. And then beyond that, you also talking about documentation of other personnel and HR related things. So yeah, how do you do that in a way that is honoring people and not creating climate
When it comes to teacher observations, teacher supervision, and evaluation, if we can flip that to a coaching model, that's going to be much better. I do think the head needs to be in every classroom every year and they need to meet with every teacher, but it's going to be even more effective the more people we get involved with it. And if we recognize that there is an authoritarian difference there and that people are going to see it as overly judgmental. And so if they can meet with their division coordinator, their VP, their mentor, if they have a mentor, and that person is coming in and coaching them based on what they see in their lesson, that's going to be much better. That's going to build up a much better level of trust. And that person is going to help improve their practice. When it comes to all those other issues, those difficult conversations that we just talked about, I've seen, and I'm guilty of this, where we don't document it, and then we get to the point where we have to let someone go, and then they're like, what? You never talked to me about this. I haven't had a good warning. I haven't had to straighten up. Or worse, you let the person go, and then all of a sudden your HR manager calls you and says, oh, there's a lawsuit against us, or there's a labor board dispute against us. And we have to protect our schools, and that comes down to doing things proper. I think, again, clarity is kindness. I think I had a difficult conversation with someone. Let's say someone's been late, right, for this, been late to school 3-4 times. We have to have the conversation. I think, as Thomas said, doing a person is better, but then you've got to write it down. And it's just a quick email, just quick follow-up based on our conversation this morning. I wanted to summarize that we talked about this, and that we agreed that you would do this, and that I would follow up with you at this date, and then send that off. And then that way you've got a written record, so that then if lates continue to be an issue, and you do end up having to do grounds for dismissal or something, you've got a perpetrator behind you. Hopefully, it never gets to that. Hopefully, it just provides the clarity for the person to correct their behavior. But we have to protect our schools. Your board is not going to accept it when you just say, I talked to them a lot. I had a really good conversation with them. It's like, well, it's unfortunately in a court of law, that's not going to help us. And we need to protect this space.
One of the first leaders that I worked with in international school, their motto was, unless it was recorded or written down, it didn't happen. So that was the practice that I started using moving forward. That way, as Howard said, you don't run into that scenario later on where they didn't talk to me about that. Well, okay, yeah, remember we had these conversations and it was followed up by a brief email summarizing it. All of those pieces, you may think it takes time to do, but it will help you in the long run. And it's twofold. It's a protection, but it also shows the import. You've taken time to record with them a summary of what happened. Then that shows the staff that these are important things that we're doing, these little feedback follow-ups or these classroom observation follow-up. It's an important enough piece that we need to make sure that both of us have the same understanding of what had happened when it happened. It just brings formality, I think a positive formality to the process.
Yeah, I mean, words are clarity, right? It's a way of, if you can't stand by the words you put in their email, then maybe you didn't provide the clear feedback in the conversation. Those two things need to be in.
And I've had scenario where I've sent the summary to that staff member and they've disagreed what happened. So then that provided a further conversation with, okay, let's have a meeting and discuss this further. And then that's an important piece. If we're not on the same page, we need to figure out how to get on the same page or a decision on what the next steps will be.
Yeah, this is a whole other conversation, but I wonder in the future if we're not going to just have AI recording all of these conversations in workplace settings, and HR is replaced with some sort of like general AI that just is the ultimate, because it can do a good job of actually summarizing some of these things. I don't know if schools or any other organizations are using it in this context, but it'd be an interesting thing to think about for sure.
I had a meeting with I know this is a totally different tangent. Had a meeting with my financial planner the other day, and they used that feature, the AI summary, and I went over, holy cow, that was, like you say, they do a very good job of summarizing those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all sorts of privacy things you need to think about, but I do wonder if that's coming. I want to ask one more question around feedback, and it's a big one, I think, in international settings, and that's where you get into the realm of different cultures. And that can be different cultures between the overseas hire staff. I mean, there's obviously cultural differences between, say, Americans and Brits and Canadians interact and talk to one another, but even more so with the local staff inside the school settings. So I wonder, could you talk again, maybe starting again with Howard, around how you navigate the intercultural aspects of providing feedback?
I think that's really important. And again, it's something that we're typically not prepared for when we come overseas, or when you work domestically. It's a much more homogenous culture, even though it is multicultural, but there are those implicit cultural norms of how we operate. Do meetings start on time? Is it okay to be late?
Thomas, do you have any reflections on the intercultural piece as someone who's come into the international space?
I'm going to tap in a comment that you made earlier, whereas it's important for us to be able to mentor and train the people that are coming into our system. So it's important for us to, once we have an understanding of what those intercultural uniquenesses or for your particular school community, it's important for you to communicate that out and have those conversations with your staff that these are important pieces. Going along with what Howard's example was, when I first worked in the UAE, I didn't realize the component there where some of the wives, you can't shake hands with the females. And I was just like Howard, I put my hand out to have that handshake and they pulled back. Thankfully, they were gracious enough to be able to explain to me what was going on so that I could use that information later on. But I like one of the phrases that Howard uses. This is the way we do things here. We need to train the people within our organization that, okay, this is how we approach, this is how we based on understanding that we have of our community, that you're going to be working with a Khmer parent, you're going to be working with a very traditional Chinese family, so that let's set our people up to be successful. And that's important, that on this topic, how are we helping our leaders become more successful? By making sure we do that mentorship piece, that we're purposely thinking about what is our school community like? What is our school community needs, as how parents want us to approach them as a school. So yeah, unfortunately there's a lot of mistakes that go along the way, but one of the things I think that's always going to be critical, if you are developing and nurturing those relationships with your school community, they will have understanding for you. They will have patience for you, and they in turn will want to teach you on how they do things. So I think that
Mhm.
it does boil down to that developing and fostering relationships with your school community. That's a paramount piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's about listening as well, right? And I think these are all so important. These thinking about this as international schools become more diverse, and the whole notion of what is an international school is really shifting.
Mhm,
And I think the intercultural piece is more important than ever.
mhm.
All right, I want to wrap up the conversation now with quick lightning rounds, and we'll start with you, Thomas. We got 4 quick questions here, and the first one is one practice you wish every leader would stop.
I wish they all would stop assuming that if I don't need to write it down, then I'm not too worried that it didn't happen. It kind of goes back to that. I think you definitely do need to be careful and do a lot of recording, making notes, sharing a lot of that stuff. So the practice that I would say they need to stop doing is assuming, if it wasn't written down, that it happened, because things scenarios will always come back on you, that you need to refresh your memory on how a scenario went. And if you haven't made those notes for yourself, then you're going to run into some problems later on. So I've kind of done the
Mhm.
opposite of what you've asked me.
No worries. The next one is one 15-minute habit that compounds results.
Having conversations with your staff, taking the time to, I think the phrasing was you use is, take the time to listen. Okay, that habit of not speaking first and just listening to your staff and making sure that you're connecting with them. When they feel that they can talk to you, then that's going to reap lots of benefits. They're more likely to be open with you later on. They're more likely to be proactive in giving you a heads up on scenarios. So that definitely, that 15-minute practice that you're talking about is sitting, listening, giving them the opportunity to talk. And that open door policy, that's kind of a weird comment to say, because you're really not dealing with doors. You want a leader that's out in the building as much as possible. So I don't want to be on the other side of a door that they need to come through. I want to be where they're at.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think to be having interactions and conversations with your staff means you're out there,
Yeah,
right, and visible. And I think if you hear the first complaint you'll ever hear from staff about a principal will be, we never see
right.
them. They're always in
Yeah.
their office,
And
right, working hard, I guess, but like not out there amongst the school
if they
community.
don't see you, then they jump to assumptions. Oh, they're just sitting in the office. Whereas when and a school leader can be strategic. Let me give you an example. And that's where parents are coming through. Could I use that time somewhere else? I certainly could have. But parents are seeing you, kids are seeing you, teachers are seeing you. And then there were times when I'd hear the teacher saying, well, I don't get to have a one-on-one conversation with you. So then I learned to take that morning time and that afternoon time where I was doing full supervision. I had somebody help me, and I did it every other day where I was doing that supervision. And then on those opposite days, I was up walking around, getting into classrooms where I could have that 5-minute one-on-one conversation with each teacher. And then I'd also record down there then, okay, which teachers did I see this week? Who do I need to make sure I get to see them the following week? So that, like I said, you can be strategic as to when you are visible. Figure out one of those key easy times for you to be visible.
Absolutely, yeah. And then one final one. What is one metric that tells you a school is healthy?
Listen to your kid. What are your kids saying to each other? Because they will often go home and tell parents what's going on in the school. So have a really
Mm.
good way of finding out what the students are thinking, what the students are feeling about the school, what they're feeling about how things are going on. That, I would say, is probably one of your paramount measures as to what's happening with the classroom. And then go up from there. What are your parents saying about your school community? They're your big customers. What they're willing to say in front of you is probably going to be a little bit different than what they're saying to their friends. Establish that relationship where you're always wanting to listen. One of the very, very, very first principals that I worked for, he was always walking, and this is kind of an old school country school guy. Whenever there were sporting events, he was actually walking around with a coffee urn filling up parents' coffee cups. But they all talked about, oh, he knew exactly what I needed. He was always there to listen. And those parent survey results were always through the roof directly because he was very strategic on the times that he was wanting to talk to parents.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, right? But so you do have to, there's a certain amount of kind of scheduling and strategy
Yep.
behind
Yep.
these things. It's not
No,
totally
no.
random, right? Although it might appear to be random maybe to the people who are connected.
The principal's not coming to every volleyball game, but they're coming to a lot, right? When you're there, be visible, be noticeable.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that you finished up there with talking about students, right? It's so easy in these conversations in education to actually not mention the
Yeah,
students, right? But they're obviously the reason why we're all doing what we do.
exactly.
So great to wrap that up
Perfect.
with talking with students. All right, and now I'd like to wrap up now with Howard with the lightning round. And the first lightning round question, Howard, is one practice you wish every leader would stop.
We as leaders, we're great at relationships, I think. I think we build well with people, but when we're in meetings, we tend to dominate the meetings with talking. And time again, I find meetings we talk about things instead of deciding things. And so then next week, talk about the same thing. And then you find 5 weeks later, you're still bringing up the same thing. And we really need to focus on obviously talking and getting to the shared understanding is important, but what's the next step? What's the next action? I think that's a getting things done principle, but what's the next action? And that's so important. Boil it down. This is what we agree on. What's the next action? Who's going to do it? And when you follow up.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. What is one 15-minute habit that compounds results?
One is not being in control of your calendar. If at all possible, you let your assistant be in charge of your calendar, let her know what has to stick and what can be moved around, and build time to get into classrooms. So I had a standing rule that I had at least 2 hours twice a week where I was in the classrooms walking around the school. And my assistant could move that around, but it had to appear somewhere on the calendar. And you know what? We all want to be in classrooms, but we get stuck in our offices. And the other thing that we did is we did no office Fridays. So I challenge all my administrators, you're not allowed in your office on Fridays. That meant they had to set up shop in the library or the conference room or the staff room, or they spent the time meeting with people. And that made such a huge difference. We do, cannot just lead our organizations from our big chairs. We've got to get out there and be hard.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think we're just, as I was just saying to Thomas, it's like what gets scheduled gets done, right? You know, there's the one thing you can't make more of is time.
There were
Yeah.
times when I would let the staff know that I might be just coming into your classroom using office time within your classroom. There were things that I could be dealing with just on my computer and not really needing to interact with anybody else. And it was just as easy for me to sit in a classroom on my laptop as it was down in my office. And I would have to let the teacher know after. Really like the class. I was not paying attention very much. Saw a little bit of your interaction, but I was focusing on some emails. So then that gave them a bit of a time to be able to, oh, he's going to be doing this. Okay. And they liked me coming in at times and doing that because sometimes it would be, they felt supported, even though I really wasn't doing a formal observation. I was just present.
Presence, yeah. And final lightning round question, Howard, what is one metric that tells you a
Names.
school is healthy?
You walk around the school with a principal, and the principal knows the kids' names, and the kids know the principal's name or the head's name, and they're interacting. That's a healthy school. You walk around with a head and nobody talks to nobody. That's you can tell that those are silos. There's no relationships, there's no engagement, there's no connection. Yeah, that makes it bigger.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You really get a sense of that quite quickly in a school, I think, when you do a visit. It's one of those ineffable things that is very, very real. And I think principals and heads knowing the names of kids is so powerful too.
Sometimes it's the context or the setting. So, for example, I can be in one school and I'm really engaged in there and I'm connected. I know the teachers' names. And then the other school, you know what? Different circumstances happened. I didn't get into the classrooms. I didn't get to know the teachers. I really don't know the students at all. And I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling the connection. And then realizing, wait a minute, that's why. So I need to change what I'm doing because I want to have a bigger impact.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, for the conversation today. Very much looking forward to future conversations around the white paper. I think we've only got into a couple of different sections today. So we'll jump into some of the other sections in the future with some of the other co-authors. But again, thanks for joining us and having this honest and open
All right, thanks,
conversation
Justin.
about school leadership.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks, Howard.
Yes.